I'm Matt Downing, and welcome to Diving Deep EDU.
Curious conversations with all types of peeps. Encouraging innovation, we are diving deep. Certainly education is what we like to speak. Fervent with dedication, now it is time to teach. Yeah.
Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. This podcast is based in conversations that are willing to go off on a rabbit trail or two in order to find those aha moments. Those times when someone is able to say something in a way that brings increased clarity. Now, I'm an educator, so much of our conversations will have that as the end goal. How can the things that we are talking about help us to dive deeper into educational practices? Thanks for tuning in. Our guest is Richard Byrne. Richard is a former high school social studies teacher and a current computer science teacher. He is a cyclist and is best known for his blog, freetechforteachers.com, which is read by an audience of more than 500,000 people worldwide. Richard is also a contributing author to numerous publications. He is a speaker and he is a presenter at conferences and schools around the world. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm great.
So Richard, let's start with being in the classroom. So you currently teach. What exactly do you teach in the classroom these days?
Students. I teach students, high school students in particular, in the subjects around computer science. So I have one class that is PC assembly and repair, which is really hands-on, nuts and bolts of how do these things that we use in our everyday life actually work. I teach a course on networking in which we build networks and students learn network security concepts and how to build a secure network. And then I have a course in programming in which students learn, as you might expect, programming. We start out with doing some Android app development. Then we get into doing some stuff with robotics. And with my second and third year kids, we kind of go into whatever areas that they're interested in. I have I'm fortunate to have a lot of flexibility in my program. My school is fantastic in that regard, that they give us a lot of flexibility on what we can do once we've kind of covered the year one introductory materials. This past year before COVID-19 and school shutting down, I had two kids who were trying to build and program their own drones, basically, but they were wheelchair drones. Is actually what they were trying to do. That would interact with the walls and the objects that they came in contact with through sensors and sonar. So it really goes all over the place. And really, like I said at the beginning, I teach students and I try to help them. I mean, my third year students this year, those two kids I was just mentioning, they're light years ahead of me in terms of some of the stuff that they were conceptually doing. But my role was really to kind of help them think about the project planning and developing the project and jumping in when they got stuck in different places.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more, because I don't know about you, but I feel like it's rare within schools to allow kids to actually explore the things that they want to explore. So as a teacher, right, as their instructor, how do you go about facilitating that learning experience while guiding them, but still also giving them freedom to do what they want to do?
So again, part of this is that I have very small classes, so that's number one. Uh, you've got to have. I have small classes. My biggest class has 12 kids in it. So it is very different from when I taught social studies, and I would have, 6 sections of 20 to 25, or in one case, 30 kids,
Yeah.
4 times in a day, or 6 times in an 8 block rotation sort of thing. Now I have kids, my biggest class had 12 kids in it, and I had them for 80 minutes. And then I had another class of 11 kids, and I had them for 160 minutes. So I had a lot of time, right? That's the big thing. Small classes, a lot of time. And with that time, you get to know what your students are interested in, first of all. Some students make it really obvious from the moment they walk in the classroom, or you walk into the classroom, what they're interested in. Others, you kind of have to help them discover what they're interested in, if you will.
Mhm.
You know, I came into it with taking over from a teacher who had been there for 12 years, and she was fantastic. And her background was a little bit different than mine. She had come from a corporate background, and her background was very much on the network security side, right? And so a lot of kids that I had who were carryovers, that's what they were interested in, but that was because of who they had prior to me.
Mhm.
And then over the course of the year, they realized, oh, like there's other stuff that's interesting, and Mr. Brown will let me go down that road if I want to. And so a lot of it's just kind of sitting down next to kids, and having a conversation about what are you interested in, what are your kind of goals for. I'm not talking about goals for life, because that's a whole different, that's guidance department stuff. I mean, I'm not like, what are your kind of your goals for the next semester, or the next year? What would you like to do? And I also have a lot of flexibility in my budget, which is, a huge advantage that I didn't have when I taught social studies. When I taught social studies, I had, whatever budget was allotted to me from the department. Now I am my own department head, and I have a lot of flexibility in my budget, and I can say to kids, "Hey, what's your idea? Draw up your plan." And so I do a lot of work with project planning with kids. That's a big piece of it. Just getting them to think about steps of a project and go, okay, so we need X, Y, and Z components, and we're going to go on Amazon, or we're going to go on whatever, CDW, or wherever we buy, wherever the best prices are for whatever we need, and we order it within reason. But really, it gets down to getting to know the kids, and letting them, I say let them break stuff. That's like within reason, right? If we're doing soldering, with my PC assembly and repair class, I have to be a little bit more safety conscious, I guess you say. I can't have kids, soldering, and I can't have kids, just like willy nilly, not, electrocuting themselves because they didn't follow protocols. So that stuff I have to, really be a stickler on. But
Yeah.
once we've got that stuff in place, it's really, hey kids, what are you interested in? Spend a lot of time looking at just interesting projects. I had a lot of my second year students spend a lot of time on sites like Instructable, where they're just looking at, oh wow, that's a really cool thing. Could I make something like that? And away we go. I had one kid who was trying to make, well, not trying to make, he eventually did make a website where you could type in a word and it would spit out a dad joke for you. That was like that was the big thing he wanted to work on. Like, he was really into making punny jokes, and so that's what he did. So that was a lot of like database type of stuff.
So it sounds like you have to have these conversations, right? You have to build these relationships. You have to sit down and actually talk to your students, about what they're interested in. And then there's some project planning, there's some exploration, right? And then how do you go about facilitating this development, this creating? Like, take the drone example, that was done this past year. How'd you go about doing that?
Well, so with that, one of the things that was really critical in the development of that project over the course of, what ended up, it got truncated because of COVID-19, but where we left it, and one of those two students is actually coming back this fall.
Oh, cool.
In 3 weeks from today, or 3 weeks from yesterday, actually. So we will hopefully get to see it, all come to fruition in the end. But a big piece of that was asking them, a lot of what if questions. A lot of, okay, so we know these three things are true about the code. We know these three things are true about the mechanics of your power supply. What if we change one of those three things? What's going to happen? We have these three things that are working correctly. What's the next step that we need to do to get us to run? So I'll give you a more concrete example of this. So at one point, they had it capable of navigating in a straight line and stopping 6 to 12 inches short of any object that it came to. But what it was really not capable of doing was using that information to turn. So what we ended up doing is going back and saying, okay, well, what did we miss, right? We missed programming in a step for taking that feedback, that what if statement. Okay, what if you stop? Then what do you want to do? Do you want to turn right or turn left? And they hadn't gotten to the point of putting in sensors that would pick up objects that were to the periphery of the basically it was the bottom of an old motorized wheelchair is what it was, where all the guts of this thing were happening. So that was kind of the place where we left off at the end of since the end of the year, but it's where we left off on March 13th when school was shut down. Yeah. Because it was also really heavy, about 200-pound object, about 200 pounds. When you have two 24-volt batteries in it and all the mechanics that go with it, it's pretty heavy, pretty heavy duty thing. So again, a lot of that was just sitting down with them and having the time to say, okay, we've tried this. What's the piece that we're missing? With a lot of smart goal planning was a big part of it too. So making sure that when we were working on it, one of the things that I discovered through mostly just through trial and error, one of the things I discovered about that particular group is those two students is that they would go down all manner of paths, all directions, and it could get lost just going, oh, well, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this. What if we, so my role really became a role of saying, okay, yep, here are some possibilities, but let's keep in mind, we've written out a goal of by December 12th, it's going to be able to go in a straight line and stop 6 to 12 inches short of any object that's in its path. Without doing that, and I figured that out pretty early in the school year, fortunately, probably somewhere mid-fall, without giving them that structure, getting them back to, okay, we've got some goals, we got to hit these goals. We would have, probably still been sitting around a table in the room going, well, what about this? What about this? What about that? So,
yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but it is an answer to a question.
Yeah, no, it does. And I, thank you for taking the time and sort of giving us insight into that process, because I think you're doing something that is very powerful. You're handing over the learning to the students, and you're accessing their interests. You're accessing what they care about, right? You're tapping into student agency, and without a doubt, I'm sure you see engagement, skyrocket, through the roof, right? And as apart from like you up there lecturing or giving them these sort of structured lessons, worksheet sort of things. So yeah, I think that's really helpful for you to
sort of give us a glimpse, how you go about doing that and then facilitating that with goals. But I also like how you're not giving it like it's still a little, there's room there for movement between students. You're sort of refusing to be like, okay, do this, and you'll achieve that. Am I right with what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's right. And there are, and I should say that there are some students that need a little bit
Mm-hmm.
or do this, and this.
Okay.
Right? There are some students who I shouldn't say need that, but they think they need that.
Mm.
Uh, those are the students that usually excelled in traditional academic classrooms because they have been trained or done really well, or they're predisposed, or their natural inclination is the teacher said I need to do these 5 things around the rubric, and I'm going to do those 5 things around the rubric. And kids who come to me from that background sometimes struggle early on because I don't give them the rubric with the 5 things they have to do to get an A, right? And so there's a little bit of there's a little bit of coaching there that has to happen. There's a little bit of flexibility on both parts, right? It's not just the kid has to, cave or mold to my style, and I don't have to completely cave or mold to their style. We got to kind of find somewhere in the middle ground. I'm picturing one kid in particular. I won't say his name in case he listens to the pod. In case he ends up listening to this podcast, and I do have kids who I know will listen to this podcast, because I won't say that kid's name either. But I can picture, I have one kid in particular who, again, is coming back next year for his second year with me, and we had some moments during the year where he was like, "No, you're not telling me what," he would say, "You're not telling me what to do," and I'm like, "I know, I'm not telling you what to do. That's the point." And we had some moments there, and then we kind of have to meet in the middle sometimes. But to a point that you were saying just a moment ago, one of the things that I said in my interview for the job that I have now, and one of the things that I've said in keynotes and in presentations at various conferences, is that it's really about trying to connect kids with projects that matter to them, right? That one of the flaws in canned curriculum, particularly things that try to be real world problems, right? Real world project based learning. So a lot of times those real world problems that come in those canned programs are not really a real world problem to a lot of kids, right? Like, for a classic example, if you're about my age, I think, and if you go back into our old math books that we had in the late 80s or early 90s, and they would have the real world math problem at the end of every chapter. Like, there's a hot air balloon traveling from Albuquerque at 10 miles an hour and one leaving Dallas at 7 miles an hour, and it contains Jose, Steve, and Maria. Where will they meet? And I'm like, I don't know where Albuquerque is, nor do I have any interest in being in a hot air balloon ever in my life, right? I actually didn't know where Albuquerque was. I have a history.
Yeah.
But you get the idea. Like, for a lot of kids, that's not a real world problem. And even things that are more like that we think are real world problems for kids sometimes aren't. Right? Like, I've seen some of this with social studies curricula in the past of, oh, we're going to do this project where kids learn about, they learn about compounding interest and how if they invest their money in a mutual fund over 20 years, they're going to have X number of dollars. Like, that's all well and good for some kids. But a lot of my kids, I was working in a district where 85% of kids had free and reduced lunch. They're not worried about saving for retirement. They're worried about saving for buying a Big Mac at the end of the week. Like, that's a much more realistic real world problem. So, it comes back to, letting kids kind of pick the problems that matter to them. A classic example that I give of this a lot is years ago, I had a student who was kind of really in what's the word I'm looking for? He was kind of entrepreneurial minded, right? That was kind of, but he was also very hard worker and always scraping for money. one of the things he figured out to do is how to use his own he got together the money for a 3D printer. His school didn't have one. And he started 3D printing parts for Jeeps. Like that was a thing. Like, it was like, our school had an auto body program, right? But didn't have a 3D printer. He went out and did this on his own. And he had a nice little sideline from doing that. But his real problem wasn't the Jeep. His real problem was he wanted money.
Yeah.
Like that was his real world problem. So that's my rant about real world problems.
So there might be some people listening, and they're saying, well, Richard already said that he only has 12 kids in the class, and they're able to. He's already talked about his budget being big, and they can go on and buy stuff. Of course, they can deal with real world problems. How would we, tapping into your other experience with social studies? Let's use one of those examples.
Yeah,
social studies class. 30 kids. How could we connect those kids to real world problems that they care about?
I'm glad you asked, because free tech for teachers. My website started when I was teaching high school social studies, and it was born out of I don't have any money. I don't have any disposable budget of my own. Like, as a social studies teacher, I had zero control over the budget other than to go to my department head and say, "Can I get some money for this?" Explain it to him, and he would check to see if there was money that we could get, right? And more times than not, it was no, because we have like $1,000 and 12 teachers in our department, right? So at best, we each got $120 or something for the whole year, right? Like not a whole lot of money. So one of the things that I did was looking at, okay, what are the online resources that I have available to me that are free or cheap? Doing things like, and I'm going to kind of date myself here now, how long I've been doing this. One of the things I did early on was having kids build wikis. They don't even make wikis anymore. Wikispace doesn't even exist anymore. But that was 14 years ago now, that I was doing that. And a lot of it was around kids writing. And, this was early days. We didn't really have, kids didn't have smartphones like they do now for making videos. But, I did have a flip cam, one flip cam. So early days, I had kids in my civics class who were doing things like, on their wiki page, they were doing write-ups around issues for our local elections. And, with 17, 18-year-old kids, that can be really fun, really interesting, even if they don't really know all the issues around it. But I always found a really fascinating example I'll give of this that stands out in my mind is many years ago, we had this big budget wasn't a referendum initiative, big budget initiative on our ballot regarding how schools are going to be funded, and it was all tied to property taxes and how property taxes were calculated and whatnot. Anyway, that's kind of beside the point. The big point is that it was about the core of the issue was property taxes. And for 17 and 18-year-old kids who have never paid property taxes, their perspective is way different than someone who's seen that property tax come out of their mortgage, right? Come out of the escrow account, their mortgage every month. But that led into my students doing little interviews with parents and grandparents and other community members. They were writing about it, and it kind of became a real world issue for them because they were talking to the people who mattered in their lives. And we wrote that up on their wiki, and a couple of kids used the flip cam to make videos about it. So you can do things without spending a lot of money and still make it real world. I'll give another example of this, not from my classroom, but from a classroom down in New Hampshire. So for folks who are listening, I live in Maine. New Hampshire's south of us. A classroom down in New Hampshire years ago, where there was a contest hosted by Verizon for app design, making Android apps, and the kids had decided that their problem that they were going to solve was an issue around school lunch and not knowing what was in the school lunch in terms of the actual ingredients, not so much it's sloppy joes today and it's hamburgers tomorrow sort of thing. Usually it's the other way around: hamburgers and then sloppy joes. But
yeah, that's right.
but their issue was, what are the ingredients, right? So they built an app that indexed the ingredients in the common school lunches that they had. So it was a nice way to solve their problem, right? And what they use, the MIT App Inventor, which is free. It's completely free. Anyone can get it. You don't even have to have an Android phone to build an Android app with the MIT App Inventor. So there are a lot of things you can do without spending money. And to be honest, if I didn't have the budget that I have for my program right now, I could still do a ton of stuff. I could still do a ton of stuff without. Now, I wouldn't be able to do the robotics stuff. That piece. It would be like one. Everyone would be sharing one set of materials as opposed to every kid getting their own materials now.
Mm-hmm.
But I can still do a lot of stuff with programming, do a lot of stuff with app design, do a lot of stuff with network security, even if I didn't have a big budget.
Yeah, well, thanks for providing a couple more examples and just sort of filling that out a bit, because that's such an important value. I just wanted to make sure everyone was getting that. The idea of connecting kids to problems they care about. If we did that more, engagement and learning would increase more than we could probably imagine. Richard, you're also a cyclist. And the other day I was reading a book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. He starts off the book talking about the British cycling team. Basically, he tells the story of how the British cycling team went from one of the worst in the world to one of the best by making slight improvements to really every part of their system.
Marginal
and there's a lot.
They call it, right?
What's that?
They call it marginal gains.
Yeah, the marginal 1% gain. And there's a lot that education can learn from that example. But really, my question for you in regards to cycling, what have you learned from cycling in regards to education? What can we take from what you've learned from cycling and apply it to education?
Your head's got to be right. That's the biggest thing. Like, I do the cycling. I like cycling. I've done it since I was a little kid, with about a 10-year hiatus in there for, other pursuits, did a lot of backpacking, some rock climbing, some other stuff in there. But, really got back into cycling about 6 years ago, pretty much just before my kids were born. It really got back into it, as a means of socializing with people. At the time, lived in a town of about 700 people, so not a lot of people around. And I had a former colleague who was active in a cycling group a couple towns away. He was like, "Yeah, you should get a. I've always mountain biked. I've had mountain bikes, and he's like, you should get a road bike so you can come out on the group rides with us." I'm like, "Yeah, all right, I'll do that." Bought a decent road bike and started riding with a group of guys, and kind of got hooked on it. Came into road biking very late in life, and so I have no illusions of grandeur of ever getting upgraded to being a Cat 2 racer or anything like that. That's not on the horizon for me. It's really trying to go for my Strava KOMs and having fun that way. But the big thing for me is, if I don't get out and ride on a consistent basis, meaning 4, 5, 6 times a week,
Mm-hmm.
for at least an hour, my mood is best described as depressed to miserable. And it just carries over into everything when I get that way.
Mm.
I'm not as creative in terms of things I produce on my blogs, on my websites. I'm definitely not as creative in terms of what I do in my classroom, and I'm just not as patient. Right, that's a big thing. It's just being patient with kids. Right, particularly if you come from a heritage that's a little bit fiery like mine, and a lot of it's just mental well-being. You've got to be in you've got to be in a good space for yourself in order to be able to help other people and be helpful for other people. That's the big thing for me. And then of course, when I get out there on an hour and a half, 2 hour, 4 hour ride, my head goes to all kinds of places, and I get all kinds of crazy ideas after a while, because it's just this year it's been just me. There's no group riding right now, which I miss. But I just get out there and just go. And that's always been my MO. I mentioned I did a lot of backpacking in my 20s. Did a dabbled in rock climbing a little bit. Done a ton of fly fishing. Did a lot of whitewater rafting in my 20s as well, and early 30s, and then and so really it's whatever pursuit it is. If you run, my brother is a great runner, was sub 3 hour marathoner. Another good friend of mine from high school, she's a fantastic marathon runner as well, and they're both the same way. Like they you get out there and you run and clear your mind, and everyone around you is a lot more happy with you too, because you're not so miserable. So that's what it comes down to. It's just keep on, just keep on moving and getting out there and taking care of your head. That's what my EdTech Fitness website, the little tagline that I made for it was, feel better and teach better. If you feel better, you're going to teach better.
And it seems like we've sort of ignored that within schools, especially with kids, right? As you're talking, I'm trying to apply some of what you're saying to like our education system, and I'm starting to cringe a little bit because I'm like, man, we're like shoving these kids into these rooms for hours at a time. And you're talking about the effects that it has on you if you're not out there biking and getting moving. And we're sort of having the kids go from like room to room, from desk to desk, sort of sitting there taking in. Do you feel like kids maybe need to move around a bit more?
Oh, for sure. Oh, 100%. 100%. I have a group of freshmen, or had a group of freshmen. I'll have another group of freshmen this year. And one of the things I always say about freshmen, and I love teaching. I actually love teaching freshmen, which a lot of high school teachers are like, "Oh, you got freshmen." I'm like, I love teaching freshmen. But one of the things I've said for years is freshman boys are ready for high school around January, and freshman girls are ready for high school in August, right? Like it's like that 3 or 4 month gap in development. Freshman boys, they are just wiggly. There's no other way to put it. Like they're wiggly. They've got to get up and move. And whenever I've taught freshmen, I've always made sure that in my plan for the day, there is time for getting up and moving around in some way, shape, or form. Whether I've been teaching computer science or I taught social studies, get up and move around. I had one group of kids, old colleague of mine who's since passed on. He and I taught a class together, kind of right towards the end of his career. We had this one group of kids. I think we had, I'm trying to remember how many kids were in the class, probably about 15 kids, but we only had 3 girls, and the rest were all boys from the wrestling team and from football team. And this was not let's just say this was not an AP class. Let's just put it that way. It was not an AP class. And they wanted to start every class with an arm wrestling match for like 5 weeks straight in one stretch. And my colleague Steve taught me a ton. He was like, "Yeah, let's just do that. It's like, get another system. We'll do that. We'll have an arm wrestling match every day." And we did for like 5 weeks. We had an arm wrestling match at the start of the day every day. Like, okay, and that's what we got to do to get them kind of in that place where they can settle down and they can, be ready to learn. There's an app. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention there's an app that I have on my phone, and I think every teacher should have on their phone. It's called Sworkit Kids, and it provides little physical breaks you can do with students in a classroom. So if you don't have a lot of space, it does things like side jump and side hops and, other kinds of fun stuff like that. So
can you spell that that app out?
SWORKIT. Sworkit.
Yeah. Cool. So you do a lot of road cycling these days. What's the longest road cycling span I don't know how would I say that? What's the longest road cycling?
Longest ride I've done.
Okay.
What you're asking is what's the longest ride I've done?
Yes. Let's say that.
The longest single day ride that I've done is 202 miles.
Okay.
So I did a 202 mile ride last June for an organization called the Fast Freddy Foundation, which provides bicycles to underprivileged children, largely children who are in foster homes. And the foundation is named after Freddie Rodriguez, who was four-time U.S. National Pro road cycling champion. Won stages of the Giro d'Italia. Wore the green jersey for a day or two in the Tour de France. He's legit rider. So that's the longest one I've done in a single day. I've done a bunch, and that was with a group. There were 5 of us that did it together, including Freddie. So Freddie and four other guys from my area, we all did it together. We raised a few $1,000s for it that day. And then I've done a bunch of 100-mile rides by myself. That's kind of my, I try to do those. My goal is to do one a month, although I haven't done any this year. I've come close. I've done some 80-mile rides this year, but I haven't done a 100-mile ride yet this year. But I'm going to do that before school starts. So in the next couple of weeks.
Thinking about that 202-mile ride, I've never ridden that far on a bike. When you're at, what does it feel like when you're at about mile, let's just say 190? You're not that close to the finish line, but you've gone a lot of miles. What does that feel like? 190
actually feels good.
Okay.
190 is actually really good. The torturous part, was the 130 to 155-ish.
Okay, how do you get through that?
A lot of Coca-Cola.
You're drinking Coke while you're...
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot of Coca-Cola. A lot of Coca-Cola because at that point, you're just fighting off bonking, right? At that point, you have burned all your fat reserves for the most part. The idea with a long ride like that, and I was training for another big 200-mile ride this year that got canceled because of COVID-19, called the DK200, which is a 200-mile gravel ride across Kansas, in Poirier, Kansas. But anyway, with that type of effort, any kind of really long effort beyond 75 miles, your goal is to try to burn fat for as long as possible before you start burning your carbohydrates that you've taken in. But at that point in the day, and I've done some other rides that have hit at 150, and every single one of them, it's around that 125, 135 where it really becomes torturous for me. And that's because I've burned off all the fat, and now you're just trying to keep going and get over that hump. And then once you get over that hump, it's okay, all right, now I got this. But there's a dark period there for about an hour or so. Okay, we gotta, Coca-Cola is great. Coca-Cola is great. Freddie ate Hostess donuts as we're going. Those little donuts you get at the gas station. Yeah, we had a few gas station stops along the way. So, yeah. So donuts. One guy was drinking Yoo-Hoo. I think John was drinking Yoo-Hoo. So I can't drink milk. I can. I just don't like it.
Yeah.
Yoo-Hoo. Yeah. Whatever.
So these are all the exact opposite of things that I would picture you guys eating and drinking. I would think that Coke would, make you dehydrated. I would think that Hostess donuts would give you a cramp, but I guess not.
No, because at that point, it's all about just calories. It's you just put your because 200 miles are burned. I could look up the data on my Garmin watch, but we burned close to 10,000 calories that day, right? So it doesn't matter. You want to put in food that you can get down. That's the big thing. You put in food you want to get down. When I'm doing a 50-mile ride, or even a 70-mile ride around my house, that's when I'm eating the stuff that you would picture. Like that's when I'm eating the Cliff. That's when I'm eating the Cliff Bars.
Yeah.
When I'm having the energy chews, that sort of stuff. But on those big days, it's about real food. When I did some mountain biking in Iceland with an old friend of mine, old girlfriend of mine, I should say, not just an old friend, old girlfriend of mine, and we rode in Iceland. I was eating like salmon and cucumbers, like not stuff you would typically associate with. Hey, we're doing a huge mountain biking thing. Let's eat really good, healthy energy snacks. No, salmon, cucumbers, a lot of cookies. I went through a ton of cookies. I love cookies. So,
keeping with the fitness theme, you also have a website, edtechfitness.com, which you mentioned a little while ago. Why was that site important for you to create?
That was something I did to motivate myself. So I mentioned that I got into road cycling. I mountain biked for as long as I can remember. Even before there were mountain bikes, and I was just hucking my BMX bike off dirt piles around my house growing up. I've always done that sort of stuff. But I got into road cycling when I was 35. So actually, that's almost 7 years ago now. I got into road cycling when I was 35. So everyone doing the math, yes, I'm going to be 42 soon. If you're wondering. But then my kids were born. Just a lot. Anyone who's had kids knows that you're just surviving chaos, right? Like you're just trying to manage chaos in that first year of like, and I had 2 kids in 14 months. I had 2 kids in the span of 14 months. So some things got kind of put off to the side, right? And one of those things was my regular bike rides. Not only road biking, but mountain biking. Like I even sold my mountain bike. That's how little biking I was doing. And I was the biggest I'd ever been in my life, except for one time in college when I was trying to gain weight by lifting weights and drinking a ton of milk. I was huge. All things being relative, I was huge for my liking, right? And I was like, this is something's got to like. And I was having back pain, that was associated with gaining weight. And people who have known me for a long time, might be like, I don't remember you gaining weight. I'm like, oh yeah, I gained weight. And so I started the website December 2017. So just before, is that right? No, December 2018. Sorry, December 2018. Because I really wanted to motivate myself to get back to like, just be accountable, right? Just be accountable for showing up and doing the work, even if it was just getting on the bike trainer for 20 minutes or 25 minutes a day. It was something, right? Just get moving. And a lot of good came out of that. Like, again, my mood improved. That's probably one of the, depending on the day, I would say that's the biggest benefit. The other big benefit, of course, is the weight loss. I lost I lost all the weight that I had that I'd put on since my kids were born. So, in the span of about 14 months, I put on about 30 pounds, and in the span of about 6 months of starting that website, I lost 30 pounds. So, wow. And I suck at dieting. So that was the other big piece of it. Like, I am the world's worst person when it comes to impulse control on snacking. Like I stress snack. That's my big thing. Like if I'm stressed out, I'll grab a bag of tortilla chips and salsa, and before I know it, half of it's gone. Like if we're having a stressful conversation in our house, I'll devour half of a bag of chips like nothing. So for me, a lot of it was just like stress management in a good, healthy way. Okay, I'm gonna get on the bike for 30 minutes. I'm gonna get on the bike for 25 minutes. I'm gonna get on the bike for an hour. I'm gonna get on the bike for an hour and a half. You're just doing that consistently. It's the biggest thing. And then, and I invited other people to join in with me. And then, some other benefits that came along. I mentioned I was having awful back pain to the point that we flew to Florida for Christmas, and I was like almost useless in terms of carrying my kids after getting off the plane because I just was having so much back pain. And I'm like, I'm not even 40 and I'm having this awful back pain, or I just turned 40, I should say, just turned 40. And I'm like, I'm having this awful back pain. And, after like a month of consistently riding my bike again, I didn't have back pain anymore. Just all the, there's just so many good benefits from moving. And so I give a shout out to one of my old colleague and current colleague again, Lance Belanger, who teaches phys ed and health in my school district, MSAD 17 here in Maine. He went out and got a grant about 7 or 8 years ago now for a program, a huge grant, $3 million grant to overhaul the phys ed curriculum in our district so that it included a lot more lifelong sports, as opposed to, so getting away from ball sports and team sports, but getting into things that kids can do, on their own if no one else shows up, right? Because we see there's all kinds of data about this, right? Like kids graduate from high school, they might have been awesome athletes, could have been varsity football player, varsity soccer player, or whatever, and then they never exercise again in their lives because they no longer have that team network around them, right? So Lance got this huge grant and overhauled the curriculum so that it included mountain biking. So the district now has mountain bikes, got tons of like rollerblades, and also the ski rollerblades. So in Maine, there's cross country skiing in the wintertime, so we have that too. Tons of cross country skiing stuff. Just doing stuff like geocaching, all kinds of stuff that you can do even if nobody shows up, right?
Yep.
Just to get people moving, and it has so many benefits to just get outside and keep moving.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for sharing your website. Once again, it's EdTech Fitness, and I'll link to this in the show notes. But edtechfitness.com, and just a lot of helpful guidance to, I would just explain it sort of to live a healthy lifestyle. And I think the way that you phrase things meets people on different levels. And I think it's really helpful. And you also provide insight into like what you have going on. And I think sometimes that can be really helpful for people to see, and it can be motivating and also insightful in the same vein. So Richard, I'm sitting here talking to you, and I just glanced at the amount of time that we've been talking and we're getting up to the 50-minute mark, and we have not talked about your blog, which is super well known, read pretty much around the world, freetechforteachers.com. And in my mind, I'm sort of going through, well, should we talk about that? What could I edit out of our conversation? And I really can't think of anything that I could take out. So what I really want to do is I want to mention that, but I don't want to delve too much into that right now because I don't want to shortchange it. And what I really want to do is I want to highlight all of the wonderful things that we have talked about, right? You've taken us into your classroom and you have showed us kids working on projects, getting them to do things that they care about. Then we've talked about cycling. We've talked about fitness. We've talked about mental health. We've talked about so many things. And I feel like if I begin to ask you questions about this, it might be squeezing it in. And it also might give us an excuse to have another conversation, maybe in the future, have you back on, and we can do it justice in the future. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd be happy to come back sometime. And I'm a rambler. I looked up the clock. I'm like, oh man, this is getting into Joe Rogan territory in terms of the podcast. So for those who don't know, Joe Rogan has like these 3.5 hour epically long podcasts. So we don't want to get down that road right now.
But this has been great. And as we bring it to a close, who do you want to give a shout out to?
So I give a shout out to my old colleague, Lancer. I will also give a shout out to two other people, Sylvia Martinez and Gary Steger. Their book, Invent to Learn, and much of Gary's work over the years has really influenced a lot of my thinking around project-based learning. I shouldn't even call it project-based learning, but just learning in general, and how to format and phrase prompts for kids. I think Gary and Sylvia's work doesn't get the attention that it should in the social media landscape, because it's not necessarily flashy, but it's amazing work.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting them. And it's time for the final word. What would you like to say to close out this podcast?
Try things and ask for help.
Perfect. Richard, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you so much for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. I appreciate your time, sharing your experiences, giving us your insight, and helping us think deeper about these important issues. To those listening, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Diving Deep EDU. If you like this episode, subscribe, share it out, post a review on Apple Podcasts. All of those things will help get this podcast out to more people. Until next time.
Wow, it's time to reflect. That's astounding. You've been checking out the podcast from Matthew Downing. Hope you like diving deep like a scuba diver. And the show provoked hope, that's our true desire.